On a dark night, in the midst of the harshest winter, when the cold cuts through to the bone, a man was driving down an empty road. Suddenly, his gaze caught something strange by the roadside. He squinted and, with horror, realized that it was a dog. A German shepherd, tied to a tree, covered in ice with desperate eyes full of pain and fear. His heart tightened as he saw her, frozen, hungry, doomed to die. He slammed on the brakes, jumped out of the car, and ran toward her, knowing that he had to save her. It was a matter of honor. What would he do to help this poor soul? Time would decide everything. The coldest winter this city had ever seen. The wind piercing to the bone, a blanket of snow thickly covering the ground, filling every gap and crack in the asphalt. The city froze, as if everything alive had fled to shelters where they could wait out this frozen nightmare. On such days, the roads become empty. Only cars, like loners in endless spaces, drive along the frozen streets. The lone driver hurried on his way, not noticing how, with each kilometer, the road became more isolated, more lifeless. He was driving his car, focused on the road, with no room in his mind for outside thoughts. He was thinking about his work, about the meetings he had to attend. But suddenly, his gaze was caught by something strange by the roadside. He squinted, trying to make out the figure faintly visible in the headlights. At first, it seemed like just a pile of snow, but upon closer inspection he realized that it wasn't snow. It was something alive. He slowed down, almost not believing his eyes. Something was tied to a tree. It was a tree, not very noticeable against the snow, but its silhouette stood out. Upon closer inspection, he realized that something bent and motionless was tied to the rope stretching from the tree. He glanced again, and his heart literally stopped. It was a dog, a German shepherd. She was tied to a tree. Her fur was covered in ice, her body was freezing, and her eyes were full of despair. She sat, lifting one paw as if unable to stand, her breath barely audible, turning into a puff of steam, merging with the cold air. The man suddenly slammed on the brakes. His car skidded in the snow with a characteristic sound, leaving deep tracks on the icy road. He turned off the engine and switched on the hazard lights. With his decision, he first confirmed that he would not leave the dog in such a condition, regardless of the circumstances. The man walked through the snow, carefully approaching the poor creature. Thousands of thoughts raced through his head, but all his concentration was focused on one thing: to save her. He couldn't believe that someone could leave an animal in such a state, tie it to a tree to die. When he got closer, he noticed how her body was trembling from the cold. Her fur had become as hard as ice, with countless snowflakes frozen in it. She couldn't stand up. Her paws were hidden under her body. Her eyes looked at him with such despair that the man felt his heart tighten. She was a living being, and all she needed was help. But there was another obstacle: the rope, which had frozen solid, as if it had become part of the tree. The man started pulling on it, trying to free the dog, but nothing worked. The rope was so tightly knotted that it couldn't be torn by hand. Its knot was complicated and frozen in place by the cold. The man felt despair closing in, but this feeling couldn't overpower his determination. He noticed that her paws barely moved. She tried to get up, but couldn't. It was clear that each breath was hard for her. His gaze slid along the road, and he remembered that in the trunk of his car there was a suitcase with tools. The man quickly opened the trunk and grabbed the suitcase, which had been lying forgotten recently. He opened it and, lifting the lid, searched for the necessary tool, finding a utility knife. His fingers were trembling from excitement and the cold, but he didn't stop. The knife turned out to be exactly what he needed. He carefully but quickly cut the rope. With each movement, it seemed that everything would be fine, but he couldn't shake off the worry. When the rope was finally cut, he covered the dog with his jacket to warm her up a little. With all his strength, he picked her up and, shielding her from the cold, placed her in the car. The dog was so scared that she could barely move, but the man knew he couldn't stop. He started the engine and sped toward the nearest veterinary clinic. The dog lacked the strength even to lift her head, but her eyes, full of fear and gratitude, did not go unnoticed. Time was against them, and every second could cost the life of this poor soul. As he drove, the snowstorm became stronger, and the road more secluded. But the man thought of nothing but saving the dog. The man raced down the snow-covered road, focusing all his strength and attention on not losing those precious minutes. Time for saving was as valuable as gold. Every second mattered, and he felt his heart racing with anxiety for the dog, which was still barely hanging on to life. The wind howled fiercely against the car windows. The snow continued to fall, covering everything around them, as if reminding of the ruthless nature of winter. In the man's eyes, there was only one thought: to save this poor soul, to rid her of fear, pain, and loneliness. He drove without thinking about the road, focusing all his efforts on one single task. Every movement was directed towards getting to the clinic as quickly as possible. The world around him seemed distant, empty, and frozen. The wind, the blizzard, the snow glistening under the headlights, none of it mattered. In his mind, there was only one concern: the poor dog he had taken with him, and her chances of survival. He knew that if he didn't make it, she wouldn't survive. The road was in complete silence, almost unlit, only faint lights in the distance. The icy emptiness surrounded him, and everything seemed frozen. With every kilometer, the cold became harsher. In the distance, lonely trees could be seen, standing like monuments in this winter kingdom. The man looked at them, but his gaze always returned to the car, and the image of the dog continued to spin in his thoughts. All he saw were her hungry, fearful eyes, her trembling paws. She seemed so defenseless that he felt responsibility like never before. After driving several kilometers, he slowed down, realizing that in such moments even the smallest details could be decisive. He heard the wind slicing into the body of the car, the tires hissing on the snow-covered road. Time stretched slowly, and every moment felt critical. He looked up, slightly reduced his speed, but didn't stop. Only the clinic, only the rescue. He pressed his hand to the steering wheel, his fingers turning white from tension. Through the thick blizzard, he began to see lights in the distance. It was the clinic. It was small, but it was here that the dog might have her last hope. He could literally feel his body tense. His fingers tightened around the wheel, and he began to speed up, holding back all his strength, hoping he would make it in time. Every second felt like an eternity, and everything around him lost significance. The engine's sounds, the cold, the light in the rearview mirror, everything slipped away. All he knew was that she was on the verge of death, and only he could help her. The man parked the car near the clinic's entrance, slamming on the brakes and turning off the engine. He quickly opened the door and jumped out of the car, not thinking about his own comfort or safety. Everything inside him was focused on getting the dog out. He still couldn't believe this was happening. Dogs tied to trees. It was a reality he couldn't forget. She had to be saved. He took off his jacket, opened the door, and, carefully lifting the dog, covered her up. In her eyes was gratitude, but she could barely move. He felt her weakness, the coldness of her body penetrating to the core. The man hurried, despite knowing that the blizzard outside wasn't stopping, and his strength was limited. When he passed through the clinic doors, the meeting with the doctors was swift. They immediately took the dog in their hands, knowing that time was running out. They quickly started emergency treatment, connecting her to an IV and checking how badly she had suffered. The man stood nearby, his hands clenched into fists, nervously rubbing his pocket where his phone was in contact with people who could help him if needed. But his thoughts were occupied only with the dog. "How quickly did she recover from the shock?" asked one of the veterinarians. The man couldn't understand what he was more worried about, the dog or his uncertainty about whether she would survive. He saw how exhausted she was, how her eyes could no longer look at him clearly. The doctors quickly determined that the dog suffered from hypothermia and dehydration. Her frozen paws were cracked, and this was far from a typical injury. Every step the doctor took brought the man hope and a sense of relief, but he couldn't relax. The doctors were doing everything they could, but everything was still uncertain. He didn't know how long it would take for the dog to recover from the shock. It seemed to him that every moment could be decisive. In the clinic, there was considerable experience dealing with animals in such critical situations, but no one could guarantee that the dog would survive. It was frightening, but the man couldn't turn back time, couldn't undo anything. He knew that all he could do was pray and wait, hoping for the best result. He spent several hours in the clinic, watching the medics work with the animal. The technician and veterinarian filled out reports, discussed treatment, checked the dog in turns, and then returned to his desk. The man felt the weight of the wait grow with each passing hour. Finally, the doctor said that the dog had stabilized, but she would need many more days to fully recover. She had survived the terrible shock, but she was strong and had made it. At that moment, when the man heard those words, it felt as though a stone had been lifted from his heart. He still couldn't believe it had happened. He didn't know what to expect, and now he felt as though he was slowly recovering from the stress. But when he entered the room to visit the dog, his heart almost stopped from excitement. He had expected to see an animal that could barely move, but before him was a completely different picture. The dog was sitting in place, her eyes clear and full of joy, and she wagged her tail when she saw him. This was the moment when everything inside him suddenly quieted. He understood that the dog was thanking him for saving her, and that gratitude became the most valuable thing he could ever receive. The man felt joy fill his heart. He knew that now, after all this time, he would be with this dog until she fully recovered, and perhaps even longer, forever. Several days passed, each one filled with anxiety and uncertainty. The man believed he had done everything possible to save the dog, but, as often happens in such situations, even the best intentions do not always lead to the desired result. The doctors could not guarantee that the dog would fully recover from what she had endured. The recovery process was long and slow, and although the animal had stabilized, it was still in very critical condition. The man could not stop thinking about what might have happened if he hadn't noticed her by the tree. These thoughts continued to torment him, but despite everything he could not allow himself to doubt the correctness of his actions. He believed that the dog deserved a second chance, and even if her physical recovery would take time, he was ready to be by her side until the end. Every day the man came to the clinic. At first, watching the dog through the window, he saw her exhausted body and weakened movements. She lay in her cage, her eyes half open, her breath still heavy. But every day, something new happened. The animal would lift her head slightly, sometimes turning to look at him. His heart tightened from this silent connection, from how, with each passing day, the dog was becoming more and more alive. Despite the difficulties of recovery, there were early signs of improvement. The doctors said the dog was showing signs of activity, responding to external stimuli. The man knew this was a good sign. He often asked the doctors to do everything possible to prevent her condition from worsening, and they didn't turn him away. With each visit to the clinic, with each day, he felt that not only the dog but also he himself had somehow changed. His life had gained a meaning that it hadn't had before. One morning, when the man arrived for his regular visit, he was met with an unusual sight. He entered the room and froze. The dog was standing on all fours, her clear gaze directed at him. This was the moment he had been waiting for so long. Despite everything she had gone through, she was standing, her tail wagging, and her eyes sparkled not with fear, but with joy. She greeted him like a family member. He could hardly believe his eyes. It seemed as if she had regained her strength. The dog approached him, moving gently on her paws. His heart swelled with joy and relief, and he almost cried from happiness. He crouched down and extended his hand to gently pet her. The dog happily moved closer, making it clear that she already felt much better. She licked his hand, and that was her way of thanking him. The man couldn't suppress his smile. This was the moment when all the weight of the past days vanished. He knew that everything would be all right now. The doctors reported that she had indeed overcome the most difficult stage. Soon she would be ready to be discharged. The man had no doubts that this was a victory. But despite the good news, he continued to worry. He knew that the path to full recovery was still not complete. But now he truly believed. He believed that the dog would once again become a full member of his life. After being discharged from the clinic, the man took the dog home. It wasn't just a step in her health recovery, but the beginning of a new life. He provided her with a cozy spot in his home where she could rest and feel safe. In the first few days at home, she was still cautious, sometimes glancing around, but with each passing day, her confidence grew. The man monitored her health, making sure she received all the necessary medications and careful attention. He spent more and more time with her, walking in the fresh air, playing, and teaching her new commands. This was not only a process of physical recovery but also a return to a full life. He sincerely believed that she had been given a second life, and now that life would be with him. He could no longer imagine his life without this dog. She had become a part of his soul, and he gave her all his love and care. The dog, in turn, also began to feel that her life had now changed. She learned to trust him, growing more attached to him. She became joyful, playful, and active as soon as she started recovering. She played with him in the park, ran with him in the mornings, as if everything that had come before, fear, pain, loneliness, had disappeared forever. In her eyes appeared what the man had longed for, genuine joy for life. Every morning, when they went for a walk, the dog looked at him with gratitude, and he felt how their bond was growing stronger. They became inseparable. The man knew he had made the right decision when he saved her. Now, looking into her joyful eyes, he understood that this moment was important and fateful for both of them. He had not only saved a life, but also gained a loyal friend who would now always be by his side. Together, they continued moving forward. Each day brought new joys, small victories. The man knew that their bond was growing stronger every day, and they would never leave each other. The dog, saved from death by him, had now become a symbol that even in the darkest times, one can find light. She had regained hope, and with her, so had he. The process of the dog's recovery after being discharged from the clinic was long, but truly exciting for the man. The first few weeks at home became a time not only for regaining health, but also for building trust. This was an important part of their journey together, and he knew she needed his care and support. The man arranged a separate space for the dog, a corner where she could feel safe and calm, away from the noisy streets and bustle. Every morning, he started by bringing her fresh water and food. He woke up early, preparing the best for her, carefully monitoring her feeding schedule to make the recovery as fast as possible. Food, vitamins, and medicinal supplements. He provided her with everything needed for a full recovery. But for him, the most important thing wasn't just feeding and caring for the dog's physical condition. He poured his soul into every action, every touch, every stroke of her fur. The dog quickly became attached to him. It was obvious. In her behavior, there was no longer the fear she felt when she was still in the clinic. She didn't turn away from him as a savior, but instead sought his gaze, showing affection and attachment. The man noticed that with each day she became more confident. She began lying down next to him calmly, looking into his eyes, her tail always raised, and her behavior became more playful and friendly. The dog began to show her natural domestication, and it became more and more apparent how they were merging into a single team. The man couldn't stop smiling, watching as the dog started to enjoy life again. She learned quickly, gradually recovering lost skills, and even her movements became more confident and fluid. Her steps, which had once been slow and cautious, were now quick and sure. The dog no longer trembled with fear. Her gaze became more relaxed, and in her eyes appeared genuine gratitude. Every morning, when they went for a walk, the man felt completely happy being with her. He noticed how the dog joyfully ran across the lawn, jumping over small snow hills, her tail constantly wagging with joy. These were moments of true happiness for both of them. They walked along local parks, through forest paths, and along roads where no one had noticed them before. Now they were inseparable. They gradually became a real family. The man arranged a soft sleeping spot for her in his room, next to the couch where he often sat. The dog began to sleep next to him, feeling his presence and warmth. He no longer felt lonely because he knew he had a loyal friend always by his side. The house became much warmer, not only because of the cozy place he had created for her, but also because a new meaning had entered his life, a meaning he had long lost. Now, he had someone to share his joys and worries with. The dog also began to show her gratitude not only in her gaze, but also in her behavior. Sometimes she brought him toys, as if offering to play. He didn't know how she had come to understand this bond between them, but it seemed she always tried to nurture it, and he gladly reciprocated. Every morning, after they returned from their walk, the man loved simply sitting next to the dog. He would stroke her, her fur was incredibly soft, and she would feel his hands calming down. These were quiet moments when he felt at peace. All the worries, all the doubts he had gone through vanished. He knew he had made the right choice. He had done what he was supposed to do. He had saved her. With each passing day, the dog became more alive, and the man felt how they merged into one. She returned to the world, she regained her confidence, and now she had a new chance for happiness. They became not only friends, but allies, walking through life together, supporting each other. The dog had regained her character, not only on a physical level, but also emotionally. But the man felt that this was just the beginning of their journey together. He knew that many more moments awaited them, moments when their bond would only deepen. He promised himself that he would do everything to fill her life with happiness and joy. He watched over her condition, took care of her, and could no longer imagine his life without her. She had become a part of his life, a part of his heart. Every day, he realized more and more that her rescue wasn't just a moment of gratitude, it was the beginning of something important, something he had never thought about before. He understood that his life with this dog wasn't over. It was going to continue, full of new discoveries, joy, and unexplored paths. In the end, he realized they had already become a family, and no winter's cold, no difficulty, could ever break that bond. Several months had passed since the man brought the dog home. During all this time, they had gone through a long process of recovery, but it was during this period that the real challenges began. In the beginning, the dog was recovering wonderfully, and her appearance was improving every day. Soft fur, shining eyes, confident steps. These were all signs that life was returning to her body. However, as her physical condition improved, psychological difficulties started to emerge. The man was prepared for the fact that after the dog had experienced so much fear and pain, she would need extra attention, care, and patience. But he hadn't expected the challenges that would confront him for the first time. He couldn't predict how the dog would react to the changing environment, to external stimuli, and to changes in life. At first, everything went well. The dog had gotten used to the house and learned to feel confident and calm. She began to trust her savior, and their bond grew stronger with each day. But after some time, the man started noticing changes in her behavior. Sometimes she would become tense, freezing at loud noises or sudden movements. The man suspected these were consequences of her cruel past when she had been tied to a tree. She couldn't fully forget the pain, fear, and loneliness she had endured. In these moments, the man felt his heart tighten. He realized that despite her physical recovery, the dog still needed emotional healing. He was ready to help her, but he still felt lost. It seemed like he had just come to her, and now she needed his help again, but in a completely different way. He became more attentive. He watched her behavior, her reactions, noting when she became tense or nervous. He noticed that she had started to be afraid of people who weren't closely connected to her, as well as loud noises or fast movements. Every morning, when they began their walk, he saw how the dog would cautiously watch the passers-by. Sometimes she would tuck her tail and become alert. It was a clear reminder of her traumatic experiences. One day, during their walk, something happened that made him truly fear for her well-being. They were walking through the park when a group of people suddenly ran past them, their voices loud and jarring, and the dog immediately bolted, jerking the leash sharply. The man was shocked by her reaction. It wasn't just fear, it was a full-blown panic attack. He tried to calm her, but the dog kept pulling nervously on the leash, barely holding back her instinct to flee. The man stopped, knelt in front of her, and tried to speak gently to comfort her. He extended his hand, showing her that she was safe, that no one would hurt her. He gently stroked her, soothing her, repeating familiar words. But even in that moment he felt the weight of her past. He understood that not everything could be healed in a few months, and not all scars could be masked so quickly. These struggles didn't stop their journey forward. The man decided that her emotional healing would require patience and a systematic approach. He began training with the dog, helping her get used to new stimuli, to changes in her surroundings, and to the understanding that her life was no longer in danger. He trained with her every day, starting with simple exercises and gradually introducing more complex situations to help her regain confidence. With each passing day, he noticed how her fears began to subside. The dog was gradually becoming accustomed to public spaces, to people, and to various situations that had once caused her panic. She began to approach people more often, allowing them to pet her, though at first she had avoided strangers. Each step was a small victory, and every success was a reason for pride. One day, after several weeks during a walk, when she confidently passed by a group of people, the man joyfully noticed that her tail was no longer tucked between her legs. She walked calmly and confidently, not paying attention to the sounds or people she encountered. That was the moment when he realized that the dog had finally overcome her fear, and that was more than just recovery. It was a return to the world where she could feel alive and happy again. Now, every day was a step forward. The man didn't know how long her emotional recovery would take, but he was ready to walk this path with her. He knew there would be more difficult moments ahead, but he believed that the dog, just like him, would learn to live again, step by step, overcoming all challenges. Caring for the dog had now become not just a duty but a vital necessity for him. He felt that with each passing day, with each success of hers, they became inseparable. She had become an important part of his life, and he could no longer imagine himself without her. They continued moving forward, and with each passing day they grew closer, sharing joy and care. The dog had returned to the world, and now her life was no longer threatened by ropes or the fears of the past. She lived in a world with the man who had saved her, and this world was filled with light, warmth, and mutual trust. With each passing day, the dog grew more confident. She was adapting to her new home and surroundings. The man understood that her recovery wasn't just about physical healing, but about creating a new life where she could be happy, feel safe, and secure. Petting, kind words, long walks in the parks and forests, these gradually made her life brighter and fuller. But despite her recovery, the man knew that there was still a long way ahead. The dog had become a part of his world. She never left his attention, and he devoted all his strength and time to her. Every day began with a morning walk. It had become a ritual, an inseparable part of their life. He always cherished these moments. He saw how the dog became more energetic, how her steps became more confident, how she began running alongside him more often, without fear and with obvious joy. These moments brought him immense joy and a sense of satisfaction. He knew that his care and attention had helped her become what she was now. The walks continued, and every day brought something new. He noticed how the dog was finding her personality. She started playing with him, running up to him with toys, like a child eager to share her world. She was not only a friend, but also a companion. walks became not just a necessity but also a pleasure for both of them. The man smiled when he saw the dog running energetically through the snow, happily playing in the park or chasing after a ball. Soon, when the dog had fully regained her strength, the man decided to start teaching her something new. He noticed that she was very smart, which gave him hope for successful training. He began teaching her simple commands like sit, lie down, and come here, and was pleasantly surprised by her eagerness to learn. Every day they practiced for several hours, and with each day, the dog became more obedient and disciplined. It was another step toward her full life. Nevertheless, despite all her successes, the man understood that the dog was still vulnerable, like any other living creature that had gone through such harsh trials. He couldn't afford to forget that her past had left its mark. Sometimes, in her behavior, he could notice small signs of anxiety. For example, if she encountered loud noises or sudden movements, she would become a bit tense, tuck her tail, or freeze. These moments made the man even more vigilant, staying close so that she could feel safe. But every time she saw him, she calmed down and became confident again. The dog became much more trusting and open. She still showed some caution toward strangers, but each day she became more friendly and open. The man was happy about this progress because he knew how difficult it had been for her to believe in the kindness of others after everything she had gone through. But he knew she was gradually learning to trust again, not just him, but the whole world around her. With each new step, the dog was not only physically healthy but also emotionally restored. The man continued looking for new ways to help her feel even more comfortable. He started inviting friends and acquaintances over so the dog could interact with them and learn to trust people. Soon, she began to enjoy new encounters, happily greeting anyone who entered the house. Her tail always wagged, and she approached people with curiosity, feeling a part of this big, warm world. The man realized that the dog's life had become complete. He saw how she had grown and developed. She had become a real member of the family. Her place was by his side, in his home, in his life. They were no longer just a rescuer and a rescued dog. They had become equals, partners, and their bond grew stronger with each day. In the evenings, when the man returned home after work, he would find her already by the door, always greeting him with joy, her tail never stopping its wagging. He knew that for her it wasn't just a habit, it was a symbol of her gratitude. She was home, she felt safe, and now every day of hers was filled with love, attention, and happiness. One day, during their walk, when they were strolling along the old wooden road, the man noticed how the dog joyfully jumped and ran through the snow. He stopped and watched her, feeling warmth fill his heart. He understood that this was the moment when the dog's life had finally become whole. He had given her a second chance, and now she was enjoying life the way any dog should. She was free, happy, and alive. Every day he spent with her with love and care, and with each passing day their bond grew stronger. He knew that many more happy moments awaited them ahead, but they had already become a true family, and nothing could destroy their connection. Soon, the man realized that he had found not just a loyal friend, but the most important part of his life, without which he could no longer imagine his existence. And the dog felt the same way.